All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we're joined by Brian Hanratty, who is a former student of mine and a graduate from the paralegal program here at Trials College, as well as now a licensed paralegal, an entrepreneur, and a professional in the engineering field there. So, thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your background and getting into the paralegal program and beyond.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, JP. First of all, it's great to be on here. Whenever I was finishing up as a paralegal student, that's whenever we were kicking off this podcast series, and it's been as a student, I found it very informative and a privilege to have amazing guest speakers. So I'm glad to be on as a guest speaker in the guest speaker capacity. In terms of my background, I actually began with my undergraduate degree in industrial engineering. Very different field than the legal field. And I spent much time in the engineering field. When I was doing my undergrad, that's whenever I started some small businesses as an entrepreneur. And that's kind of how I got sort of involved in business and startups and entrepreneurship. And then as I continued in my engineering career, I was working at a large manufacturing company here in the city for about a couple of years. And during those experiences, as well as my business experiences, I felt, well, it would be very helpful if I knew more about the law, if I knew more about the various legal processes. And that's whenever I decided to enroll at Trios in the paralegal program. And I personally think it was one of the best career choices I've made. um, Not only have I, made so many new connections in terms of networking, I've as a professional myself, I've developed a new set of skills. And currently, I am working as a licensed paralegal at a paralegal firm. And in particular, I'm focusing on landlord and tenant board matters, as well as small claims matters.
So it's such an interesting sort of diverse background there. And when you kind of coming from engineering to law, how would you compare, going through school for those different things? Anything that you had to like sort of turn off in your brain, your engineering brain, when you came to law, or is there some similarities?
Well, actually, I found it was very complementary. In terms of engineering problem solving, the scientific approach, it's very similar to the legal approach. In the sense that you look at the facts, you look at the evidence, you look at you follow like a logical sort of process and way of approaching a problem, whether that be you're trying to optimize a supply chain, or in a legal matter, you're trying to understand what's the heart of the case here, what's the the question of law here at issue. So yeah, really, I found it very, very complimentary. I found it was actually quite a natural transition, actually. And actually, whenever you're dealing with a case, you look at case law, and you look at the common law and the precedent from that, and you're citing cases and whatnot. It's very similar whenever you get to academia, in terms of like graduate school, and you're citing various papers from different research groups. It's very similar in that regard. That was another nice similarity that I found. um, and so yeah, I really found that there was nothing really like contrasting. Like everything was very complementary, and sort of that transition into the legal field. Even the amount of hours of work that you put in, there's a lot of work involved in both fields. You have to spend lots of time. You really have to pay attention to detail and whatnot. So it's yeah, I found it very, very similar, in fact.
So actually, I have quite a few students that are just starting, and you may remember the legal research and writing class. And again, one of the
Mhm.
things maybe from an engineering background, you're saying, look, everything is complementary, but now you have to, a whole process actually about doing the research and then getting, creating a memo, doing the case briefs, things like that. Anything that you could share from that experience, or any of your experience now as a licensed paralegal, in
Mhm.
terms of the research and writing process when it comes to the law.
Yeah, in terms of the writing process, because considering myself as a newly licensed paralegal, I'm still relatively new in the field, and one of the things that I find really helps is looking at examples. So looking at at our firm, for example, looking at examples of letters, of memos, and essentially benchmarking. My work to previous work. There's that saying, don't reinvent the wheel. So my advice to students starting off with legal writing is look at various examples of legal writing, whether it's as I said, like a demand letter, or you're looking at a particular form that needs to be filled in, whether it's small claims court form, or landlord and tenant board form. And yeah, just look at like all those examples and use that to sort of help mold how your style of writing would be, and what are the necessities that you need to put in. And that would be my number one piece of advice, is look at examples, and base your work off of those. That being said, you don't have to like copy things word for word. Of course, you would want to tailor um, you know uh, those examples that you've seen to what you're working on, and to the matter at hand. And of course, those specific details would be unique to whatever matter you're dealing with. Um, but in terms of the structure and the format, looking at templates and examples is the best piece of advice I can give.
I mean, sticking with the program there, I mean, again, students obviously like hearing from those who've also, who've been in their shoes, virtual shoes, albeit there, but I guess you had a little bit of that that experience there in the end. But what can you share kind of in terms of the rest of the program, in terms of getting through and completing everything, maybe from whether it was mock trials. I mean, you had quite a few of those in your studies there, as well as the multiple choice exams, and again, even some of the assignments, like we were just talking about, the research and writing components. What can you add and share for those who are just starting out, and what do they
Mhm.
have ahead?
Well, what I really liked about the program was it had a very hands-on approach. All the assignments were very hands-on. Like they were things that you would actually be expected to do as a licensee. From uh, creating, for example, demand letters, or filling in various specific forms, to actually practicing in a mock trial. Though those are all essential skills that you would be expected to be adept at as a licensee. And so I really like that hands-on approach. um, and then in terms of sort of like the extracurricular sort of stuff. So for example, this podcast series, this being sort of a supplementary to the program, as well as I think the Trivia Tuesdays. Those sorts of activities I found really enriched the learning experience. And in terms of preparing for the P1 exam, I found the program was very good at sort of tailoring me towards being successful in that regard. Where it's multiple choice. So it's the exact same as a P1 exam. It's multiple choice, so you get very comfortable with multiple choice exams. You get you start to develop those exam taking sort of I guess strategies for multiple choice. And of course, with the paralegal program, the sort of work term experience, like at the very end of the program, I found that a lot of fun, where you actually get to go out and work with an actual licensee, and you get to see real cases at hand, and you get to contribute, and I found that very, very fun and engaging. Um, so overall, I think the program was very well constructed to get you ready to not only write the P1 exam, but to be successful and to practice as a paralegal.
And you mentioned those multiple choice, open book exam strategies. What kind of worked for you, whether it was in the program, and then we'll switch gears afterwards and talk about the P1 exam and
Mhm.
prep for that. But what did you find
Mhm.
though in terms of, did you use like an elimination method, or did you like already know what the answer was, just went right to it, seeing where that choice was? What did you find worked for you?
Well, for the most part, if so if you know like the answer for sure, like the range of like 90 to 100% sure, you knew what the answer was, then you just circle that answer, of course. But then for the questions where you were able to narrow it down to say like two candidate answers or potential answers, that's where the elimination technique would be great, because then at that stage, if you have to guess, it's sort of a 50-50, versus if you just kind of randomly guess and you don't try to use a elimination process, you have four choices versus two choices, so the probability would be a lot smaller in terms of guessing the correct answer. Another strategy that I found that worked in cases where you weren't able to eliminate answers, and so you still had your four possible answers, and you had that for say like a few questions. What I would do is, instead of um, just randomly guessing a letter for each question, I would consistently choose the same letter. So that way, if some answers are allocated a particular letter, you'd be able to at least try to get, at least just on blind guessing, at least two or three of those answers correct. Now, that being said, in terms of actually using those strategies, myself personally, I actually really never had to sort of do that. I think the best way to prepare for really any multiple choice exam, and any exam really, in terms of whatever format it comes in, whether it's free response or multiple choice, is to actually just study study and prepare and know the material, so that way it's very easy to actually complete the exam.
So very succinct there, just study. So how did you study? How did you prepare then in terms of the exams, and
Mhm.
what was kind of the methods that you used to get ready?
Yeah, so I found the most helpful was rewriting practice exams. Um, I believe you can get some practice exams online for free. You can also purchase some as well. That's what I did a lot of. Well, at the very very beginning, what I did was actually just refresh my all the material in my mind. So I would go through the various textbooks that came with the program, and then there's also the package that the LSO gives you for the P1 exam, and so I thoroughly went through that, which does take quite a long time, because if I remember correctly, we're looking at 800 pages or something of content, um, and so after a good few months going through that material, then I started to get ready for the exam itself, in terms of the time constraints, in terms of the multiple choice format, and that's where the practice exams really come in handy. Um, but if you're just starting to, if you finish the program and then you're ready to write the exam, I would say, or to get ready to write the exam, I would say, don't just start off with practice exams first. actually go through the package that LSO gives you, go through that material, maybe try to draw connections with the material that you have from the program. So, supplementing with your textbooks to get a better understanding of different concepts. And then once you feel that, you've reviewed a lot of the material and maybe not specific details off by heart, but you kind of know, the essence of the content, then I would say you'd be ready to try out the practice exams and just practice until exam day. So that way you don't have to worry about running out of time or, exam day sort of tension or anxiety. You'd be well prepared in that regard too.
And what else there from the switching over, I guess now more into the P1 exam there. What's that feeling like? So you write the exam, and you wrote it, did you write it in person or did you write it remotely?
Virtually. It was
Virtually. Okay.
virtually.
So
Yeah.
what is it
Yeah.
like writing it virtually? I mean, I think that's something
Mhm.
that students certainly are going to get used to. And then
Mhm.
kind of waiting for the results. What was that feeling like?
Yeah, so actually writing it, if I recall correctly, I think they had us have two cameras on. So one to show like a frontal view of us, so like webcam, for example, on our laptop, and then another sort of side camera. So that was very interesting. Um, and Yeah, going through the exam itself, I found, I think maybe it was just more because of my preparation. I felt it was relatively like smooth. I didn't get into any sort of like time trouble, but it is long. It is long, and so you do have to be prepared for that. That you're going to be sitting down for hours on end. Make sure that you're well rested. Make sure that you've had a decent breakfast. Make sure that you're well hydrated. Because that's one of the things that I found during the exam was, near the end you get kind of fatigued, and that's where maybe whenever you're approaching certain questions, you might miss certain details. And that's actually another thing with writing the exam itself. Before like rushing into answering, make sure you understand what the question is asking, because a single word can make a huge difference in terms of the context of the question and what the correct answer would be. Um, and and then another thing that I found, and I'm sure maybe you've heard this a lot as well, is that there are lots of questions. I'm not sure about percentages or whatnot, but there are lots of questions on ethics and the ethics of practice. So I would advise, like, make sure you you know those ethics well. A lot of them are common sense, but nonetheless, make sure you go through those. And there's lots of examples, at least in the textbook that I received from the program. There were lots of great examples there. And you'll find that that's certainly one of the recurring themes in the exam is around ethics. So if you're thinking of where should I start in terms of diving into the material, you should probably start there. And then so after I finished the exam, I don't remember how long it actually took for the results, but it was certainly like a good 2 months at least. And um, yeah, I guess once you've written the exam, you shouldn't really feel like any sort of like tension or exam anxiety, because the exam's done essentially. So the past is the past. If you did well, great. If you think you did so, you can't really do anything about it. It's really just about waiting until those results come out, and hopefully it's a pass. If not, you need to sort of reflect on what were those areas that I would need to improve, and to try and put together a plan to reattempt that exam at a future date.
I do want to switch gears for a little bit because I
Mhm.
know you have some background here, and I'm actually teaching a
Mhm.
global business management class with international business law, and
Mhm.
I know you have some light, some experience there that you could shed light on sort of the process. I know we were
Mhm.
talking about
Mhm.
in my class this week. about some of the struggles there, with different jurisdictions, different languages, different choice of law, choice of forum, things like that. So anything you can share from your
Mhm.
experience there, that I think would be valuable for my students who may be listening.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So first of all, in terms of my career, I spent a couple of years at a aircraft manufacturing company. You probably heard them in the news recently. This is a large global company, and essentially to make an airplane, we would be getting parts from all around the world, and you can just imagine. Well, now the contracts involved with that would be very complex, because now you have to consider things like different jurisdictions in different countries. You have to consider different political events or movements in those different countries as well. There was a time, I believe, the former administration in the United States, where they were setting certain, I believe it's either steel or aluminum tariffs on Canadian exports, and that certainly was something to consider in the aircraft manufacturing industry, where your cost of raw materials goes up. And besides jurisdictions, and another thing to understand is, you know the actually crafting the contract itself. You want to make sure that your terms and conditions are very clear. Um, you know, for example, English might not be the common language between the various parties. I read it somewhere, but there was an experiment done where they took like a couple of sentences in one language, and then they ran it through a reputable translator through several different languages, and then whenever they translated it back into the original language, they found that the actual phrases that they had were very different. So that's certainly a consideration, is to make sure that a word or a saying in one language is accurately interpreted in a different language whenever you're crafting those sorts of agreements. And then yeah, and another thing to consider, especially with these international supply chains, is you have to figure out transportation. You have to figure out who owns what during transportation. Does the transfer of ownership happen whenever the product has been shipped from a facility, or is it where that product has actually been delivered at its target destination? So there's a lot of intricacies that have to be considered, and that's where usually a lot of these large multinational companies have their own legal departments to figure that all out, essentially. So that was kind of my experience. Now, in terms of in my actual sort of engineering capacity, so I was actually a member of the corrective actions team at this manufacturing company at our Toronto site, and so one of the major things that our team dealt with were quality defects in the actual manufacturing and putting together of a jet, essentially. And so one of the big things we would have to look at is the root cause. Like, where does the accountability lie? Is this like a supplier issue where there's a bad part that worked its way through the supply chain, or is this a workmanship issue that's more internal to the company, or is this a supplier workmanship issue where it's there was before the component got shipped to us, there was some workmanship issues at the supplier site, which is external to the company in some cases, or in some cases it's still internal to the company because the company owns a subsidiary supplier. So the you know it was certainly lots of fun at the time whenever I was doing that sort of work, and it certainly allowed me to appreciate how complex some of these agreements can be, especially at the multinational level.
Yeah. So do you know, in terms of where the responsibility lies, like how would they kind of go in terms of enforcement? Like, I mean, is that something that by default it'll go through whoever is the main parties there? I mean, that they would try to put it in like a choice of law contract there. I mean, do you know anything that happened where they'd have to go into sort of some kind of international arbitration, or what ended up happening?
So usually part of these agreements, there is like a resolution process that is agreed upon as part of the agreement. So if there are any discrepancies in whether there are defects in what's being provided or the service that's being rendered, there is usually a process that's outlined in those agreements where they try to they try to solve it in sort of a negotiation style. They discuss, okay, what's the issue? Let's have a look at the evidence here. Let's look at the documentation, the logs. Let's have a look at the pictures, if there's any video, to establish, okay, if this is clearly a supplier issue, then we'll essentially provide like a refund or provide you like a new part at no cost, or something of that nature. If it's a lot more, I would say, controversial, that may be escalated to sort of mediation stage, or even an arbitration stage. Usually what you would find, and you can probably look at various sort of business news headlines to see this as well. Whenever there would be large disagreements between large companies, usually you'd find, okay, well, there might be lawsuits, and then you can probably see, well, those lawsuits are for very large figures, and the time invested into that would be very long. And then after one company sued another company, and that company responded with another lawsuit to the other company, then you find that they settled, and maybe they formed a new partnership, or maybe you might find that one company is selling a subsidiary to the other. So usually what you find is a lot of these disagreements never really materialize into an actual legal action that is completed. Usually a lot of these, if there's any disputes or whatnot in the supply chain, it's usually resolved without having to go through the full legal process, which makes sense considering just the time and cost that would need to be expended if you were to follow through with the legal process from start to finish.
And is there anything else, in terms of those
Mhm.
who have businesses wanting to get into these fields? Anything else to worry about in terms of once you go from your domestic country and you go international?
Mhm.
Are there certain added, um, well, I'm saying maybe you can use the word liabilities, I guess, but certain other challenges and obstacles that you wouldn't have to deal with if it was a Canadian business dealing within maybe intra-province, or within the same
Mhm.
province, as opposed to the US and beyond.
Well, yeah, certainly if you're dealing with exporting or importing products, you want to look at the tariffs and any sort of government imposed taxes for that. Um, Also, another thing is, and it's not really maybe necessarily related to like the legal side of things or legal perspective of having a new international business, but you want to look at competition, right? You would want to really study, if you're going to open up a new business in another country, or do business in another country, you'd really want to do your research as to what sort of competitors are there right now, what are sort of the barriers to entry, what are sort of the opportunities and the threats, and kind of do that whole analysis in the first place. In terms of other sort of barriers for international business, it's another one is human resources. You'd want to ensure that you hire the resources that you need, that have the skills and the qualifications to complete the work, and that's where you you look at, well, maybe there's discrepancies in different sort of countries with respect to different professions. So, for example, a profession here in Canada might have, very different sort of process and required experience and required education and required examinations versus another country for the exact same profession. And that's where that might be one area that you would want to look into. Another also is the actual cost of labor itself. Maybe it might be cheaper for you to outsource than to actually take on the responsibilities of having employees. Um, and getting more back into the law, looking at various employment laws in different countries. That certainly would be another consideration as well. And of course, certain countries have very sort of weak employment laws where the employee is not really well protected in terms of having employment rights. So those are just some of the considerations. There's certainly a lot more, but that's somewhere that one can start.
Okay, great. So let's switch back to, I guess, on the paralegal side. So I know you also wear a lot of those different hats too here. So of course, my paralegal students, I think, 2 years ago, you would have been in their shoes at the same time.
Mhm,
So where are you now in terms of, you mentioned you're doing landlord tenant stuff, and you're working
mhm,
as a licensed paralegal. What are sort of the things that you do, and what's kind of, in terms of a day to day? I know obviously every day is different, and you have a number of other things you're doing, but what are the sort of things
mhm.
that you would be doing, and what's it like practicing?
Yeah, so really, pr- being part of a legal firm is great because you're not starting off on your own. You already are part of a team, and there's already that infrastructure there. So really, in my sort of day to day, because of my past experiences with entrepreneurship and whatnot, and engineering work. I do a lot of the sort of marketing at my firm, and I do a lot of like the intake work. So anything from updates to the website to connecting with prospective clients, and providing consultations. And so that's really what the majority of my day to day is really just listening to prospective clients, listening to what their issue is, seeing if, first of all, if it falls within the paralegal scope, and then seeing if we can help them, and essentially explain to them how the process works, and once they have been retained, then performing the work on those particular files. Um, but yeah, usually like I would say like 60 to 70% of my day-to-day work is actually intake, and then about 30% is actually work on actual like retained files. um, and then yeah, besides that, I think what I really like about sort of the day to day is that it is very different. You do hear different types of matters, even though if it might be for example relating to landlord and tenant matters, you hear like very different sort of circumstances, and so I always find it very interesting. I find it also enlightening as well because it pushes me to sort of do my homework and look up different aspects of whether it be the RTA or other sort of statutes and whatnot. So I like it. I enjoy it, and it's very engaging.
That's good that you mentioned, the non-practice, the side of being a paralegal or working in the legal field, and certainly you have an
Mhm,
entrepreneur background as well. Like maybe you can expand on this with, but as much as we learn, and you said there's hands-on learning. What about then we had that practice management course as well, but what is it
mhm,
that you think students need to also supplement their studies here with their legal studies with, in terms of knowing in terms of the actual practice? Now it's a lot more than
mhm,
just law, right? What are the other things that you
mhm,
should to pay particular attention to, especially if you want to open up your own practice or
mhm.
um, work with a partnership or something like that?
Yeah, so in terms of the actual like running of the business, you'd want to look at marketing. That's certainly one. You'd want to look at sort of operations management. So what are the various business processes that are that the firm is using? Are those efficient? Are those effective? Can they be improved? especially now with this sort of transition to, sort of virtual practice, so to speak, where there's a lot more sort of online work being done. There's a lot of some firms are still sort of in that sort of hands-on sort of physical appearance kind of mode, and that might be hard whenever you need to access a file, but it hasn't been uploaded online. There's a physical file that exists at the office, but you want to have like an online file that you can work at remotely, for example. Like at our firm, there was a former paralegal there that lived very, very far away from the actual office itself. So what really helped was that we would scan and upload all of our files onto like a cloud, like Dropbox, for example, and that way everything would be easy to access, essentially wherever you were, whether you're in the office or you were at home, or you were at a different location. Other sort of considerations is sort of, and I guess this just comes with more experience working and communicating with people, is sort of how you carry yourself, that sort of aspect of professionalism. How do you communicate with your colleagues? you know uh, I would always encourage you know uh, everyone to ensure that you have that sincerity and candor, and you treat your colleagues with respect. There's many cases in past work experiences where I got to observe sort of very sort of unfriendly sort of work experiences, where you'd have manager yelling at others, and stuff like that, and really it's not conducive, it's not productive for the workplace. And you probably have learned this in some of your courses, and if you take business courses, for example, and management courses, they would reinforce this as well, right? You know Treat everyone with respect, and ensure that it's a positive sort of open work environment. I find that that sometimes can make a very big difference in terms of how the like a business in general. It doesn't have to be like an actual paralegal firm. It could be any business, how it runs, and the morale of the members on that team. But yeah, that's one of the things I really like about the current firm that I'm at, is we have a very good sort of teamwork sort of environment, and it's a very supportive environment. And yeah, I find it certainly has allowed my work to sort of flow positively. Yeah.
They talk about supports there, and one of the things
Mhm.
that we've talked about, and you probably remember, I think you may have even asked somebody way back when, in terms of taking care of your own mental health, and making sure,
Mhm.
especially the profession, whether even in school as a student as well, you might have part-time work. I think you used to juggle like 15 different things. I think you were even in school for something else. How do
Yeah.
you find time to kind of find time for yourself there to make sure that you have that ability to keep the engine chugging along, whether now as a practitioner or previously as a student? What do you do in terms of making sure everything works?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I from my own personal experience, I learned to very quickly that you want to avoid filling up your plate, so to speak. So you always want to leave at least 10% of your time to yourself. And if that can be used for like exercise, that can be used for reading, that can be used for really any sort of hobby that you like to I guess help de-stress from from the end of the day. But also even if you don't, if you're that sort of person that is sort of like a workaholic, and you always want to work, if you kind of plan your schedule so that you always have this sort of 10% of free time, it gives you flexibility, in terms of okay, maybe some days you might not use that 10% for yourself, and you might use it for, continuing to do more work, or different types of work. But if you always try to plan that you have this sort of reserve in your schedule, it does allow you to, it allows you to avoid burnout. It allows you to avoid feeling overloaded. And it also allows you to explore other opportunities. So, for example, whenever I started the paralegal program, I was working at my manufacturing job, and I was also doing another sort of engineering degree as well. And so I found that that certainly took up lots of my time. But that being said, I would always try to keep, at least 1 hour in my day to myself. And usually I would use that for, exercise, going for a run or going to the gym, lift some weights, etc. But on other days, I just used it as, sort of an extra hour to allocate to something that, I wanted, whether that be to finish up work for my manufacturing job, or whether to, dedicate that to, my studies, or just taking a nap. I found that was very helpful, and it's really helped me to kind of manage all those activities at the same time.
Okay, so I just want to check if there's any other questions here from the students. Okay, so what I see here, what about in terms of now looking back, you did all those different things. What do you kind of think, getting that license? What sort of the next steps there for you? Thinking long term, is it something in project management? Is it something in engineering? Is it something in law? Is it something that mixes everything, business, entrepreneurship? What kind of are you looking at doing going forward?
Yeah, so currently I'm actually completing my MBA actually at the Rodman School of Management there, and so I certainly see that, my sort of, I guess, passion is really for management, and really for helping organizations grow and prosper, essentially. So that's where, my current work right now with the paralegal firm that I'm with, I find that a lot of fun, because I get to help grow the firm in terms of marketing and sort of advertisement, and connecting with prospective clients and whatnot, and at the same time, further develop and hone my legal skills as a licensee. In addition to my MBA, I'm also doing sort of a remote Bachelor's of Law program at university in the UK. It is remote. It's completely online. Um, Otherwise, it'd be, a very, very sort of expensive program. Always flying back and forth across the pond there. But I'm doing that as well, because I would like to try my hand at practicing law itself, and writing the barrister and solicitor's exams at some point in the future. Um, I do feel that my place in the future is probably somewhere in business or law, or both. Um, and yeah, I think really, the future is open. And I think that's the same for really anyone, right? Anything can happen that can sort of change up your perspective, and change up the direction that you feel you want to go on in this journey of ours. And for me right now, that's where I'm leaning towards, is management, and business, and law in general.
Just
See,
one
there's a
question here
question
from
coming up here.
there's a question here from Daphne. So Daphne's asking, what are some of the biggest challenges in the field right now? So anything that you can share. I mean, we also didn't really talk about COVID. I mean, you did everything remotely. Maybe you can talk about that as well in terms of doing, an internship remotely, in terms of writing the licensing exam remotely. How has that all played into everything?
Yeah, like, well, I think especially now that, which is a good thing that cases are going down and vaccination rates are going up. Um, there have been certain schools that are allowing in-person learning now and attendance. For example, my MBA program, they've actually called us back into the classroom now. Um, Albeit, respecting like social distancing and all the other sort of protocols there. But you know, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, learning remotely, especially those who may not have, sort of technology access or sort of fast internet speed. That was one of my frustrations for Trivia Tuesdays, was that I always, whenever we were doing it remotely for the Cahoots, I would always have such slow Wi-Fi that even though I knew the answers, I wouldn't be able to answer fast enough to be on the leaderboard for some of the games. Um, you know, and also, there's pros and cons to various forms of learning. One of the things I've really liked about virtual learning is the fact that you don't really have to travel, especially for someone like myself that doesn't drive. You know, I it saves lots of time, whether I would have to take public transport or to Uber. It saves lots of time and costs virtual learning. But at the same time, in-person learning provides you that sort of social interaction with your colleagues, with your peers, with your instructor, and those connections are very important as well. We are social creatures. We do need to sort of communicate with each other and talk and get to know each other. Um, so yeah, it is challenging. As I said, there's pros and cons to both sides. Um, and now with the transition to sort of being more in person, um, we just have to kind of wait and see like how everything plays out. In terms of the the courts and tribunals and whatnot, everything is still online. One of the big things though is that there is a hefty backlog of matters, and I believe it was addressed in the news recently that they are planning, the government is planning to hire more resources to address that backlog of cases and whatnot. So that is certainly one of the big challenges right now in the legal field.
Now, as a follow up there to that, because I think you had it the other way, right? You were in person and then we went remote.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it very well likely is going to be the other way here, from remote to in person. What can you sort of share from those
Mhm.
two experiences you have for those who may now be going in person and wondering what's that going to be like? What was the I know you touched on it there before, so I just wanted to follow up on some advantages and disadvantages about remote learning in terms of maybe not necessarily obviously the travel and the things like that, but just is there anything differently when you're in person that you found when you were studying online?
Yeah, yeah. Well, like, I think like the discussions was certainly one part that was missing online, that was certainly happening more often in person, where someone would ask a question, for example, and then the instructor would answer, but at the same time you would hear sort of commentary from other members of the class as well, and maybe some of their experiences, and it was a lot more free flowing in person than online, because of course with virtual learning comes virtual etiquette. If you want to speak, you need to raise your hand on Zoom or on Teams, etc. And so the sort of flexibility of communication is more limited online. And so that is something I would say in person. the students here may find more enjoyable is that they actually get to know their peers. They get to learn about their different experiences coming into this program, whether related or not to legal field or other fields, and really networking. Because it's not just about getting your diploma. It's also about forming friendships and connections that you may cross paths later on in the future, and whether that be in the legal field or sort of other fields. And it's just like with any sort of networking, that's important, right? It's important to form those connections, because you never know, you might be working together again, in a future office place. So yeah, there are, like, I would always say that, like, with respect to like the social interactions, in person is a lot better. But in terms of just focusing on content and just sort of the convenience of learning, if you have, like, all the tech set up, you don't have any issues with Wi-Fi, such as myself, then online is certainly a lot more efficient. Um, but as it's pros and cons, and of course different people have different tastes with respect to how they want to learn as well.
See another question here about comparing the we were talking about open book exams, whether at trials versus the P1 exam. How did you find in terms of, was it similar or differences in terms of challenging in terms of questions? I mean, was it
Mm.
also related? You mentioned being tired, I mean, having food or something there to get you through. What can you sort of say between the exams that you did in trials as well as the P1
Yeah.
exams?
Well, first of all, the P1 exam is a lot longer than any of those sort of individual exams, whether it's a midterm or final. Um, Another thing also, in terms of difficulty, um, the P1 exam is a lot more difficult. And at least for some of the exams that I had at Trios, I did find some of the questions were sort of word for word verbatim from the textbook, or some of the material provided in the course. So it would usually be a lot easier to respond to those sorts of questions. But on the P1 exam, it is a lot more heavy in terms of sort of content and the circumstances of the question itself. There are what I found very, very different is that unlike some of the questions that you might find in trios, where it's like maybe a couple sentences, there are some questions on the P1 exam that were almost like a paragraph, for example. And there are effects or consequences from that, right? Because now you have to think about managing your time. You have to think about reading quickly, but also accurately. Paying attention to specific words that are used. As I said earlier, a single word can make a very big difference in terms of how you will select an answer for that question. Um, so yeah, the P1 exam is certainly a lot more difficult, and for good reason, of course. It is a licensee or a licensing exam. But as I said, if you do your due diligence in terms of preparation, and you pay attention to the questions at hand, you have a relatively good chance of succeeding.
All right, Brian. Thanks again for joining us here. I just have as you probably remember, the last question there is any final words of wisdom for the paralegal students here or anyone else listening. And congratulations again on getting through the process there, completing the program, getting licensed, and all the best with law school and all the other school. You're gonna have like if you ever have a podcast, your whole wall behind you will be filled with degrees and diplomas there. So congratulations on all that, and best of luck with that, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, JP. Yeah, in terms of final words, I would just say to the class that um, you know for example, I mentioned it earlier. The program at Trios does provide a lot of sort of supplementary or extracurricular activities, in the sense of, for example, this podcast series, as well as like the Trivia Tuesdays and a lot of other activities. I would highly encourage you to take advantage of those opportunities, because they do enrich the learning experience. It helps you to cover more content, more material, or the same material that you get delivered in the program, but from different perspectives, and allows that material to sort of be reinforced. And I found it very helpful for me in terms of preparing for the P1 exam, as well as practicing now. There are certain concepts and topics that if it wasn't for a lot of these extracurricular activities, I wouldn't be as well acquainted with those. And you guys are very lucky to have an instructor like JP, who does go above and beyond to support you, and to help and provide a lot of this supplementary activities and whatnot to enrich your learning experience. Thank you, JP.
Thank you for that. The check is in the mail there, Brian. There, but again, all the best.
He doesn't pay me to say that.
All the best again. Enjoy your weekend there, and again, I know, and thanks also. I know you're an instructor that you're teaming for is coming on Wednesday, so we can check that out. And for coordinating that, I enjoyed getting the chance to speak to that class as well. So all the best again. Thanks everyone for joining. Again, next week there's a lot of great guests, another student on Tuesday, and a former Olympic athlete and turned lawyer here. I think it's a great story you want to listen to on Monday, so join us again, and take care everyone. And for those that have class in 2 minutes, I'll see you there.